I have a passage that I want to share with you, especially my brothers and sisters in Zambia. It's coming from Luke chapter 10, starting from 29 to 37. This Bible passage is going to bless you. Pay attention to it. The Bible says in verse number 29 of Luke 10, but he, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Then Jesus answered and said, "A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite, when he arrived at this place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him, and went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you." So which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? Now, who is your neighbor? Zambia, who is your neighbor? My brothers and sisters, who is your neighbor? Listen, your neighbor is not somebody who lives next door to you. Your neighbor is somebody who comes through during your crisis. Neighbors are strangers that come through during our crisis in life. You might go through a crisis, but your neighbor will come through. So may God bless you, my brothers and sisters. Who is your neighbor? Who is your neighbor? Zambia, who is your neighbor? During this crisis that the nation is going through, that's when you are going to see who is your neighbor. When people are losing employment, that's when they are going to know who has been their neighbor. Who is your neighbor? We have a mentality of being good to people when they are doing fine, pretending to love them when we are after what they are having at that particular, that power they are having. Especially in the political circle. When you become a leader, a lot of people pretend to love you when they are after the power that you are having at that moment. So brothers and sisters, when your business is doing fine, you have a lot of friends. Those are not real friends. Those are fake friends. Those are not your neighbor. Let crisis come over your life. Let crisis come in your family. That's when you know who is your neighbor and who has been your neighbor. It's high time we understand who is my neighbor. Your neighbor is not somebody who lives next door. No. Your neighbor is somebody who comes through your crisis, who comes through during your crisis. That is your neighbor. These 2 priests, the priest and the Levite, they present Christians, believers, those you worship with, those you congregate with, those you interact with, those you laugh with. They are represented by the priest and the Levites. A good Samaritan represents somebody whom you look down on. represent somebody you despise, somebody you don't talk good of, somebody you insult. That is a good Samaritan. Because during your crisis, the same people today you are insulting, the same people today you are looking down on, they shall come through and offer solidarity and offer help. So who is your Samaritan? Your Samaritan is your neighbor. A person who comes through when you are in a crisis. Look at what is happening in Zambia. The crisis, the suffering that is in Zambia. This is when you are going to know who is our true neighbor. During this time, this is when you are going to see who is our neighbor. So Zambia, my question is, who is your neighbor? My brother, my sister, who is your neighbor? Your neighbor is not somebody who lives next door, but is a person or is someone who comes through when you are in a crisis. It can be a stranger whom you don't know. And most of the good Samaritans or neighbors are strangers whom we don't know. Those are the people who come through. So may God bless you as you identify who is your neighbor. May God bless you. Shalom, shalom.